Imagine a region constantly in flux, alliances shifting, power dynamics just rewritten overnight, it seems.
It's incredibly volatile.
And right now, all eyes are on Iran, a country that's just gone through, well, a dramatic series of military and strategic blows.
Yeah, quite staggering, actually.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into what looks like the unraveling of Iran's regional power status.
We need to explore the impact, both immediate and long-term, of these recent conflicts.
Exactly. And the nuclear ambitions, some surprising twists there, plus the internal pressures facing the regime. They seem immense.
Profound pressures, yeah, could reshape its whole future.
Our mission here is to unpack what all this means for regional security, stability.
For the Iranian people, of course, living through this.
Absolutely. And, the wider geopolitical landscape.
We've pulled together a whole stack of sources, intel reports, regional analyses.
Internal opposition reports, too.
Yeah.
Academic perspectives, trying to give you that shortcut to being really well informed.
Okay, let's get into it.
So the initial military actions, talk about intensity.
Striking is the word. It kicked off with targeted Israeli airstrikes, June 13th.
Hitting what they called critical nuclear infrastructure.
Yes, and then swiftly followed by significant U.S. intervention.
Right, using advanced weaponry. Bunker busters, tomahawks.
Specifically bunker busters, yeah, designed for those deep, hardened targets. And the cruise missiles, aimed right at Fordow, Natanz, Isfahan, the main nuclear sites.
These weren't just symbolic taps on the wrist.
No, designed for maximum impact.
And the claims coming out afterwards from Washington, Jerusalem, they were stark, painting this picture of, well, near total destruction.
Very strong language. Netanyahu said the war brought to ruin the nuclear program.
And former President Trump went even further, didn't he? Completely and fully obliterated.
He did. And Vice President Vance asserted the U.S. cut off Iran's ability to convert uranium to a weapon.
Then you had DNI Tulsi Gabbard echoing this later. New intelligence confirmed facilities destroyed, years to rebuild.
The Israel Atomic Energy Commission agreed. Setback of many years. Fordow inoperable. I mean, on the surface, that sounds incredibly decisive.
Unequivocally so. Like the end of Iran's nuclear ambitions, almost.
It does sound like that. But here's where it gets complicated. How complete was this obliteration?
Because the initial assessments tell a slightly different story.
A more nuanced one, yeah. And frankly, conflicting. There was an early USDIA report, preliminary marked low confidence, mind you.
Okay, important caveats.
Very. But it suggested a much more limited setback. Months, not years.
Months versus years is a huge difference.
Massive. It acknowledged significant damage, but crucially said facilities weren't totally destroyed, and the underground infrastructure not collapsed.
Yeah, so the bunkers might have held up.
Potentially. And what's fascinating is the speculation in that report that some highly enriched uranium might have been moved before the strikes.
Moved out. Wow.
And that many centrifuges could be largely intact. We even saw satellite images showing activity at Fordow just before the U.S. strikes.
What kind of activity?
Looked like they were sealing tunnel entrances with dirt, possibly trying to protect what was inside.
That is a colossal difference in assessment. Creates real strategic ambiguity, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If official statements and initial intel disagree so fundamentally, what does that uncertainty mean? Does it embolden Iran? Deter them?
And it wasn't just the facilities. There were tragic personnel losses, too.
Yes, at least 14 scientists killed in Israel's operations, including a very high-profile nuclear scientist, Mohammad Reza Siddiqui Saber.
That's not just about losing machines. It's the human expertise. The brain drain.
Exactly. Losing key people like Siddiqui Saber, that's a qualitative blow. It could stall research, development, operational knowledge for years, regardless of the buildings.
So how did Iran react officially?
Well, they notified the UN watchdog, the IAEA, on June 13th, said they'd adopt special measures to protect our nuclear equipment and materials.
Signaling they'd try to secure what was left.
Right. And their parliament quickly approved a bill to suspend IAEA cooperation, though that still needs Guardian Council approval, apparently.
So not fully enacted yet.
Not yet. And their Atomic Energy Organization is assessing the damage, planning to resume operations. Clear intent to rebuild, maybe even retaliate on the nuclear front.
Even if the timeline and their actual capability are now, well, up for debate.
Intensely debated, yes.
But the blows weren't just nuclear, were they? The conflict seemed to expose wider cracks in Iran's regional influence.
Deeper vulnerabilities, definitely. Things maybe masked before by their proxy network.
Like Israel's air superiority. It really showed up the shortcomings in Iran's air defenses, didn't it?
Laid them bare. and their overall military power. Key commanders eliminated, like Major General Ali Shetmani.
Critical infrastructure hit too. Missile sites, bases.
Across the country, yes. And Iran's own attempts to strike back, missile and drone attacks on Israel, that retaliatory strike on a U.S. base in Qatar, widely seen as ineffective.
Suggesting a diminished capacity for conventional power projection.
Significantly diminished, it seems. And zooming out, that vulnerability hit their proxy network hard, the so-called axis of resistance.
How so?
Well, Hezbollah's leadership, for instance, reports said it was wiped out in rapid IDF strikes.
Left out. With no real comeback.
No significant retaliation was the description. Plus, you had the fall of the Assad regime in Syria back in December 24.
That must have hurt Iran's logistics.
Massively. Severed crucial supply lines to Lebanon. Seriously curbed their ability to project power, to threaten Israel via proxies.
It really paints a picture of strategic isolation for Iran.
It does. Russia and China seemed inactive, mostly. Broad support for Israel from Western capitals makes it much harder for Iran to negotiate or find allies willing to stick their necks out.
So what's the ripple effect on regional power dynamics?
Well, with Iran weakened, Israel's clearly emerging as the dominant military actor.
And the U.S. reinforcing its position too.
Yes. Creates a bit of a power vacuum. The Sunni bloc, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they might try to fill it. Reshape alliances.
Turkey, Qatar. Could they expand influence?
They could certainly look to, but, even though Iran is weakened, we can't just write off the destabilization risk.
They could still fuel extremism.
Yeah.
Use remaining proxies.
Exactly. Think about the Houthis. They explicitly said they're not bound by any ceasefire, would keep hitting Israel. So, diminished, yes. Eliminated, no.
Which brings us, I suppose, to the internal situation in Iran. The economic and social pressures.
Perhaps the most critical component right now, these pressures were building long before the conflict, but now dramatically worse.
The economy's gone from bad to worse, is the phrase I saw. 14 years of sanctions, water and electricity shortages, mismanagement.
Chronic issues. And this conflict was an additional shock. Nearly 7 million people reportedly fled major cities.
7 million, that's huge displacement.
Staggering. Inflation's forecast to rise substantially, maybe 43.3% in 2025. The real has devalued significantly, just makes daily life incredibly hard.
And a huge part of that economic problem is the IRGC, right? The Revolutionary Guard and communist networks.
Pervasive economic control. Reportedly over half of Iran's GDP. Entities like Setad. Basically the supreme leader's economic empire.
How much are we talking?
Assets over $95 billion, just for Setad alone. And they systematically stifle private business. Corruption, forced sell-offs.
Creating an impossible environment.
Absolutely. And you see these massive scandals, the $2.6 billion bank Melli fraud, a $2.7 billion embezzlement linked to an IRGC tycoon, that $3.7 billion Debs scandal.
These aren't small things. They point to something systemic.
Deeply corrupt. And what's compelling is how this hits ordinary Iranians. Take crypto mining.
Unlicensed crypto mining.
Yeah, largely IRGC controlled apparently. Consumes vast amounts of electricity. Leads to widespread blackouts for the people.
While the military barracks stay lit up.
That was the bitter comment from one baker, yes. The lights never go out at the military barracks. Really shows how resources are diverted.
Diverted from the people for, well, private profit.
Often illicit profit. And then there's the regime's spending priorities. Draining national wealth. The nuclear program estimated over $2,000 billion since the 80s.
$2 trillion. That's almost unbelievable.
Yeah. Astronomical. Plus ongoing support for proxies. Hezbollah, maybe $700 million a year. Assad regime got maybe $50 billion by 2021.
Wealth that could have gone into infrastructure, healthcare, water.
Urgent domestic needs. Completely ignored.
It's just a shocking level of misappropriation. Squandering national wealth.
So with resources funneled away like that, what's the impact on the street? Is the pain turning into unrest?
It seems so. A relentless surge of protests across all 31 provinces.
Or 31. Wow.
Driven by basic demands. Water, electricity, bread, dignity. You've got crippling power outages hitting over 70% of the country. Estimated daily losses of nearly $2 billion.
$2 billion a day just from power cuts.
That's the estimate. Acute water shortages turning cities into deserts, hitting farmers, causing fights over water prices, and just the inability to afford basics because of inflation and corruption.
Who is actually protesting? Is it diverse?
Very diverse, not just one group. Truck drivers held a nationwide strike. 155 cities, paralyzed transport, the slogans. Death to the oppressor, be it the Shah or the leader. That's a powerful statement, comparing the current leader to the Shah.
Speaks volumes, doesn't it? Bakers facing tear gas for protesting spoiled dough and rising costs. Retirees demanding stolen pensions, chanting, "They've stolen the oil fund and left us destitute."
Retirees out on the streets.
And students rejecting humiliation, surveillance, some even confronting the Basud enforcers. It's broad, a sense of shared neglect and injustice.
You'd think, with that level of discontent plus the military hits, mass uprisings would have just exploded.
Logically, yes. But while the unrest is deep, the reaction to the strikes seems more like shock, focusing on personal survival.
Why is that, do you think?
Partly, it's the deep fear of regime retribution. They crack down hard. And also maybe this perceived unpatriotic angle protesting when the nation is under attack, as the regime frames it.
It's a complex psychology. Survival instincts versus deep anger.
Very complex. And the regime's response? Predictable, increased securitization, internal crackdown, brutal and paranoid.
How many arrests?
Since June 12th, at least 700 Iranians arrested on political or security charges, including alleged Mossad spies, shows the paranoia about infiltration.
And they appointed a hardliner to command the IRGC ground forces.
Brigadier General Mohammad Karami, notorious for suppressing dissent, signals their deep concern. And executions have surged, over 160 reported in May alone, trying to instill fear.
But it's not all suppression. There's pushback.
There is this fascinating counter-narrative. A nationwide network of resistance units.
Who are they?
Largely young, educated people, many women in leadership roles, actively organizing protests, challenging the regime's authority.
Are they having any impact?
They've conducted targeted operations, explosions at besieged bases, destroying regime targets. Reports suggest it's boosting morale among strikers and others, shows determined opposition. So where does this leave the regime? Stable, on the brink. Views seem to differ sharply.
Very conflicting. Professor Nader Habibi suggests collapse is still unlikely, points to public fear, the regime's history of just muddling through crises.
And some online sources, Reddit discussions mentioned, claim the Ayatollahs can weather any storm, have mass support, dismiss protests as foreign-funded.
But then you get economist Mahdi Ghazi seeing strong signs of regime change, even early stages of state failure.
What's his reasoning?
The economic impact, the inability to provide basic services, the international isolation, he sees it as unsustainable.
And that opposition leaders comment that the ceasefire left Iranians more terrified than war. That's chilling. Fear of the internal crackdown outweighing fear of external conflict.
It really highlights the dilemma. Resilience versus potential collapse. It's hard to call.
Truly complex. And this complexity shapes their international moves, too, like the defense minister visiting China recently.
Aziz Nasserzadeh, seeking stronger economic and defense ties.
Exactly. And significantly, this follows reports Iran was unsatisfied with recent support from Russia during the conflict.
A potential pivot towards China.
It looks like it. China's already their biggest trading partner, biggest oil customer. Stands to gain.
But are China and Russia just going to give Iran a blank check?
Probably not. They're allies, but pragmatic. They're expected to encourage Iran to show flexibility, reach agreements, reduce tensions. They don't necessarily want an uncontrollable regional conflict either.
So this reorientation could have big global implications.
Definitely. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, wrapping this up.
Go on.
If you connect all these dots, the deep internal fractures, the huge economic strain, these seismic shifts in regional power.
How might this period of, well, profound weakness fundamentally reshape Iran itself, its identity, its role, beyond just geopolitics?
Right. What would a truly new Iran even look like? And who would build it? The disillusioned youth? Those resistance units? Maybe even reformers from within the regime?
That's a huge question. Lots to mull over there.
Indeed. Something to think about until our next deep dive.